Welcome to Chapter 1, Introduction to HTML. In this section we're going to discuss what HTML is, what it's used for, and we're going to discuss some of the core concepts of HTML, including tags, other elements, as well as attributes and styling. Okay, so what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's the language that your browser reads. Whether you're using Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, all browsers read HTML pretty much in the same way. One thing that can be misunderstood is that HTML is not a programming language. A programming language allows you to describe some sort of process or calculation. HTML is more of a way of adding context and structure to text and other content. It's physical. It doesn't perform calculations. The World Wide Web Consortium creates the standards of HTML. There's HTML, XHTML, XML. This series is going to focus on HTML5, which is the newest version. Alright, so the syntax of HTML is pretty simple. It's fairly easy to learn, and I'm sure some of you already know this stuff. But HTML uses a set of tag elements, and the idea is to wrap the content in the tag, and the tag will then format the content how you want it to look. For instance, here we have, this is a heading wrapped in an H1 tag, which is a heading tag. So this would be, by default, it would be a large heading. And this is a paragraph, would just be standard paragraph text. Now you can change the size and the look of the headings and paragraphs through CSS, but your browser also has a default setting, a default font size for headings and paragraphs. So this is a standard, probably the most simple website you'll ever see, but it is actually a complete HTML document. So what I'll do is go through this, what we have here. First of all, we have the doc type, and it's very important that the doc type is the first element on the page. This is not a tag. The doc type is not a tag. What it does is it's an instruction to the web browser about what version of HTML the page is written in. If this was XHTML, you'd have something different here. You'd have the XHTML doc type. So that should always be number one. Next we have the opening HTML tag, which obviously we need. It's the top tag always. I don't think you'd ever have anything above that aside from the doc type. And next we have the head, and inside the head we have the page title. We have the opening title tag, the title, and then the closing tag. Now the page title would usually show up on either the tab of the browser when you're on a specific page, or in the top bar of the browser. This wouldn't be displayed only in the actual inner page, but this is very important, mostly for SEO reasons, for search engines, because this is what shows up when your site pops up in Google or Bing. So it's important to optimize these titles, but that's beyond the scope of this tutorial. And next we have the closing head tag, and after the head we have the body, which is obviously the main content of any website. And obviously in this we only have just a small paragraph. Obviously there'd be a lot more in here. We just have a hello world wrapped up in a paragraph tag just for show. And then we have the closing body tag, and then finally we have the closing HTML tag. So all HTML tags are either block elements or inline elements, and I'll explain this a little more when we actually build our web page. But basically a block level element, it creates a block of content. It creates a new line before and after it. An example of a block element would be a paragraph. Now if you have a paragraph, if you have text wrapped in a paragraph, then there won't be anything before that on that line or after that on that line. It starts a new line always. Now H1 through H6 headings also are block elements. Forms, You have div tags, which are block level. All of these would create a new line, which I'll explain more when we're actually doing our project. Alright, so inline elements, they don't create new lines like a block level element would. So you can have, say, an A tag, which is an inline element, run alongside of another A tag, and there would be no space, there'd be no line break in the middle. They could be on the same line. So that's an inline level element. We have the A tags. The bold tag is an inline element. Input tags. And input tags actually don't have a closing tag, which I'll explain very soon. Span tags are also inline. So all tags have attributes, or can have attributes. And there's a number of different kinds of attributes. We could have the width or height as an attribute, the style, and as we have here, the href attribute, which is a URL. And most attributes, if not all, are in a name value pair separated with an equal sign. So here we can see the attribute name is href and the value is http google.com, which is the link. And just like before, we have the text wrapped in an A tag, which is a link tag, and we have the text Google. So what this would look like in the browser would just be the word Google, and you could click on it and it would be a link. So attributes, they basically just provide additional information about a tag or an element. And attributes are always specified in the start tag. They're never put in the back, in the ending tag. So we have some other common attributes. The style attribute is a big one. The style attribute will allow us to design the layout and the look of our page, of certain elements on the page. And here we have an example. We have a p tag, which is a paragraph tag. Wrapped around the text, this paragraph will be red. And we have the style attribute, which is the name, and then we have the value, which is color red. Now this is a selector. This is a style selector, color. There's many different kinds. There's background color, there's width, height. We'll get into that in a later section. And here we have the ID and class attributes, which will allow us to select a certain element, and these are usually used either for JavaScript or CSS. If you have an external style sheet, you can connect an ID or a class to an element. Here we have the p tag and we have the ID my paragraph. So we could style this in a CSS style sheet by just defining this ID and then the properties we want to attach to it. The title attribute, it just adds extra info about the element or tag. And this, in most new browsers, will be displayed as a tooltip if you hover over it. Like right here, we have a link and we have the title, click to go to some site. So this would be a link, and when you hover over the link, a tooltip would pop up and say click to go to some site. Singleton tags are tags that do not have a closing tag. They can also be called void elements. An example of a singleton tag would be the image tag, the img tag. This right here, img open tag, img close tag, is wrong. Only the opening img is needed. And this is usually used, or always used, with attribute only tags such as image. They can use a trailing slash in HTML. If you're writing XHTML, then the trailing slash is required for it to be valid. But HTML, HTML5, you do not need it. It's usually not used, but it doesn't hurt your document if you do use it. And here we have some examples of tags without a trailing slash. We have the line break, the horizontal line, image, command. and this is what they would look like with the trailing slash. And once again, if you're using XHTML, which is not covered in this tutorial, this is how you would do it. So images on an HTML page are defined by the image tag, the IMG tag. And as we talked about in the last slide, the image tag is empty aside from its attributes. There's no content in between, and there's no ending tag. It's strictly just the IMG with the attributes. And the most important attribute which is needed is the source attribute, which is abbreviated SRC. And what this does is it points to the physical location of the image you want to display. And you could use an absolute path like this, which is the entire URL, or you could use a relative path depending on where your HTML file and your image file is on your server. And another needed attribute is the alt tag. Let me just make this lowercase. The alt tag, what it does is gives it a text title. It differs from the title tag, as it's not a tooltip. When you hover, it doesn't hover over as a tooltip. But what it does is, if your image is not found, say your image isn't there where it should be, this will display. So say you have a logo. You might have a logo on your web page, but if for some reason the server can't find the logo image, you could actually just have your company name as the alt tag, so that it would display the name as opposed to just being blank or anything like that. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is separating and styling your HTML. You can style your elements with the style attribute, which is what we're going to do in this chapter. Next chapter we're going to introduce CSS, which is cascading style sheets, where we would have an external file to do all the styling, selectors, and so forth. CSS is actually preferred, but for this tutorial, for simplicity, we're just going to use the inline style attribute. And what we can use to separate certain blocks of HTML, we can use the div tag or the span tag. And the biggest difference between these is the div is a block level element and span is inline. And here we have an example. We're using the div tag and we're using the style attribute, and then we have the selectors and the values. So we have padding, which is 5 pixels. We're going to have, first of all, what we have here is an H1 heading and a paragraph. Very simple. And it's wrapped in the div tag with padding of 5 pixels, a background color of black, and color of white. So what this means is this block right here, first of all, is going to have a padding of 5 pixels. So it's going to have 5 pixels on each side of it, a space with 5 pixels on each side. And the background color of the entire div will be black. And the color is actually the text color. So the H1 in the paragraph will be white text. And I'm going to get into this very soon when we start our first project, our first small web page. So here are some common style attribute selectors. As I showed you in the last slide, we can have the color selector of red, which would make the text red. Background color, make it blue. Background image, we could actually have an image as the background, and you would just put the location of the image, either absolute or relative. Padding, 5 pixels, which is the space around it. And margin is similar to padding, but there is a difference, and I'll get into that in a later section. And display block, we could also have display inline, we could have display none, which would hide it altogether. And here we have some border selectors, border style, color, and width. Now there's a shorthand way to do this. We don't need to have 3 selectors here. We can actually have one called border, and then just add the values of each of the style, the color, and the width. So we've covered the basics of HTML syntax and the tag structure. In the next section, we're going to create a project that'll implement all the techniques that we've learned through this section.